Right, good morning everybody. Oh, it's a bit ringy, isn't it? Good morning to members, officers and members of the public, those who are attending the meeting in person and those who are attending remotely. Welcome to this meeting of South Cambridgeshire District Council Cabinet. We normally take decisions by consensus here, and it's the intention to keep on doing that. So let me just mute my laptop here. Members of the Cabinet will be entitled to speak before non-Cabinet members, we will then go to other councillors and anybody else who wishes to contribute. So can I begin, please, by confirming that the meeting is quorate? Have we got a problem? Apologies for the delay. We were just checking that people joining us on the webcam could actually hear us. So I believe that you could. So that's a good thing. Okay. So can I please confirm that the meeting is quorate?
Thank you, Leader. Yes, I can confirm this meeting is quorate.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Are there any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Leader. We've received no apologies for absence.
No apologies for absence. Thank you. Does any member of Cabinet have any declaration of interest pertaining to items on the agenda? No? No, so no declarations of interest. If anything crops up, then you can let us know within the body of the meeting. So, starting off with item 4, which is the minutes of the previous meeting, which are asked. So these are the meeting held on Monday, the 12th of December 2022, and I move the approval of those minutes as a correct record. I think Councillor Brian Milnes is seconding.
I'll second that, thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any comments on the minutes, please? No. So do members agree to approve the minutes? Anyone wish to vote against? Anyone wish to abstain? Councillor Hawkins, you weren't present, were you, because you were on leave? So thank you for noting that. Cabinet therefore agrees the approval of the minutes as a correct record by affirmation. And moving on to public questions. We've received one request from a member of the public to make a statement which was refused as it didn't accord with the public speaking scheme. But I don't see any member of the public in attendance anyway. So we will move on from that item to number 6, which is issues arising from scrutiny and overview. Councillor Stobart, we've agreed that we'll take the items within the body of the agenda. Are you happy with that?
Yeah, that's understood, Leader. Thank you.
That's lovely, and thank you very much for attending today to present the significant amount of work that the Scrutiny and Overview Committee have been doing over the last month. They've covered a lot of very important stuff very thoroughly. So, moving on to the first significant item, and that's the Greater Cambridge Local Plan, the Development Strategy Update. And I'm going to ask Councillor Toomey Hawkins to introduce this, and I believe it's going. I think I'm going to second it. But Councillor Hawkins, if you would like to introduce it, please.
Thank you, Leader. Good morning, everyone. Firstly, I just want to say thank you to everyone who has been involved in getting us to this stage. It's a lot of work that has gone into this, and I'm now here just introducing what has been very intensive work over the last few months. Of course, the work on the local plan continues in alignment with the timetable that we have in the local development scheme of 2022, which followed the first proposals consultation that we had back in the end of 2021. And the report before us this morning sets out an update on our development strategy based on 3 points, which are the revised objectively assessed needs, the ongoing changes in water resources planning and provision, and the potential housing delivery implications. And I'll just take those in turn as briefly as I possibly can. For the assessed needs update, of course, the starting point for local plans always is the objectively assessed need, which is informed by the expected economic growth and assessing if there are any constraints that may prevent that need from being met. And the starting point is what government expects of local authorities. That hasn't changed. So in the light of recent national census results and the COVID-19 pandemic, we undertook to review and update the assessed need. And of course, that outcome has been fully discussed at the last scrutiny meeting. And that is that population has increased, and there's growth in life sciences and IT sectors which have increased and continue to. And what that means is, for the plan period that we're looking at, 2020 to 2024 to 2041, the updated jobs figure is now 66,000, which is up from 58,500 before. And the housing need to support those jobs is 51,723, which is up from 44,400 from the first proposals. Greater Cambridge continues to be a dynamic growth area, and we can't get away from this. And I'll just say this, some other parts of the country would love to have some of our growth, but they don't. But we just need to try and make sure that we meet that growth in a sustainable way. Now, one of the infrastructure factors which has a direct impact on meeting the assessed growth needs in a sustainable way is water supply. Now, that is the responsibility of the water authorities. And for Greater Cambridge, that's Cambridge Water. Now, we identified this potential limitation in the first proposals, and we made it clear that the preferred options set out for the plan were dependent on there being evidence of adequate water supply and without unacceptable environmental harm. And we were waiting for update information from the water planning process. Now, you might recall that Water Resources East in November 2022 published its draft regional water resources management plan. And it identified potential shortage of water supply, which will limit the region's growth, both economically and agriculturally, and cause environmental damage if not addressed. Now, the regional plan does propose a new water reservoir in the fens for the long term, which is expected to be in operation around 2035 onwards. But in the medium term, it proposes that Anglia Water implements a strategy of water transfer to Cambridge Water from around 2030 onwards. Now, Cambridge Water supplies water for us in our area, and it is yet to publish its own water resources management plan, which should give us more specific information on how it proposes to provide water supply for Greater Cambridge. So we need that information to enable us prepare the local plan in a sound way. And of course, I must remind us that the local plan first proposals includes water efficiency policies in the climate change section. Now, the third point is on housing delivery. As well as understanding the implications of water availability, we also need to understand whether the annual average housing delivery rate associated with the increased housing need is deliverable. In particular, in the period towards the end of the plan, when there will be a very significant water supply once the reservoir is delivered. But right now, we don't know whether or not we'll be able to meet our increased needs in full. This is why we are confirming our position now regarding the key strategy elements, but we need to do further work to update that delivery strategy in full. The fewer new homes we have available for us in Greater Cambridge over that plan period, the less likely people will be able to live and work here. And they're likely to have to travel longer distances to and from work and elsewhere, which means more negative effects on our climate change and biodiversity improvements that we're hoping to have. Now, I need to reiterate that the current 2018 adopted local plans provide for 38,000 homes to be delivered from 2011 to 2031. An additional 16,000 beyond that, as set out in the housing trajectory that was included with those plans. And as far as I'm aware, the 2018 plans were fully supported by the water authorities and the environmental agency. And the strategic sites that are in that include Northstowe, Camborne West, Bonnier Field, and Water Beach. So what do? Our housing commitments at the time of the first proposals were for 37,200 in the planned period up to 2041. And beyond this, the first proposal set out a climate-focused strategy, which include assumptions of increased housing delivery rates at Northstowe and Water Beach, and additional homes on the existing site of Eddington. Now, among the other sites, the first proposals propose 3 strategic sites, which are Northeast Cambridge, Cambridge East at the airport, and the biomedical campus, which incorporates existing campus and further areas to be considered. We consider these sites being on the edge of Cambridge at the most sustainable locations and should form the building blocks for future development. It means then that we can continue to work on those sites to help inform the policy development for the local plan as we go forward. So having reviewed all the responses that we got for the first proposals consultation, we consider that the first proposal's development strategy principles remain valid, and we propose to use them to inform the preparation of the full development strategy going forward. So we have identified that we need increased objectively assessed need, but we're not yet in a position to confirm the targets for the jobs and the homes. And that is why we're here this morning, and I move the recommendation in paragraphs 5 to 10 to Cabinet for approval, as this will enable us to continue working towards creating the draft local plan for later in 2023. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Hawkins. And my thanks to the authors of this report, Caroline Hunt and Jonathan Dixon, and to all of their team. There's been considerable work gone into this, and will continue to be considerable work. Councillor Snowbark, would you like to tell us about the outcomes of the Scrutiny and Overview Committee meeting? I mean, I'll just tell you that there were compliments from people viewing that meeting about the robustness of the scrutiny of the local plan. It did take quite a long time, but this is the most important thing we did, and the Scrutiny and Overview Committee did themselves great service by being so thorough about it, and it was noted by the visitors who were interestingly land promoters really, but they thought a very good job had been done, so thank you for that. So over to you now.
Thank you, Leader. So I would just like to pick up where you left off, thanking the officers for the quality of the documents that we worked with. There were a lot of them, but I think the quality of the documents raises the level at which scrutiny can begin, and I think that made us effective, if perhaps somewhat challenging along the way. Well, we did talk a lot. We raised a lot of questions. And in fact, the themed approach that we adopted, where we led with the interest in water supply and then proceeded through jobs, development strategy and housing, was a result of, I think, quite a thorough preparation. So it allowed the chair and vice chair of the committee to basically partition those questions into those themes. And while we spent a great deal of time, probably an hour and a half on the water question, it did leave the openings available for the other topics. So let me just run through each. But noting that this was a joint meeting between Scrutiny and Overview and the Climate and Environment Advisory Committee, so more people involved meant a deeper level of inquiry and some ideas that sparked between the members of the two committees. So we led with water because of its fundamental nature. This is the, if you will, the kind of the limiter on the development process. And we investigated in some detail timing and the feasibility of some of the strategic, if you will, kind of suggestions, the Fen Reservoir and the supply from Grafham Water, and question those in some detail. We would like to know more in the fullness of time about the feasibility of those two projects and their relationship to the proposed delivery of housing, and that would, for example, lead to a stepped approach, but the steps would have risks associated with them, and those risks might magnify as we go through the planning period. So assumptions about timing we were particularly concerned about, and we would like to raise again in due course. I think there was just as a kind of a separate item, a concern that in perhaps current developments, even though we're not obliged to, the building regulations don't require, some developers are working towards schemes which mean housing has much less water demand. One of the members of Climate and Environment Advisory Committee raised the question of, is there experience there that we can cite and that we could bring to bear on our planning process, and in other ways that we could influence developers to reduce water demand in future housing. I think one key concern, and Climate and Environmental Advisory colleagues promoted this quite heavily, was the possible dispersal, so that if we weren't able to develop the strategic sites as we were seeing now, that there would be some dispersal of house delivery which would actually have a serious environmental effect. So there was a concern that we expressed, and I think as the plan develops that will have to be considered further. Now, we quickly leapt from considerations of water onto jobs, and one of the first questions was around the safety of the predictions around jobs. We compared the standard model with the model that the planning team were using. We debated the integrity of the model and some of the assumptions made, and I think those assumptions do need to be kept scrutinised because they do profoundly influence the output. So consistent checks, but we were satisfied that the team had done their job well, but assumptions need to be considered and reconsidered. We did ask the question of what happens if the houses aren't built, and I think we were able to hear, the effects on local economy, the inability to deliver a good environment for the people of Greater Cambridge. There was just, and this was perhaps a little detail towards the end, but how will commuting patterns influence the development of Greater Cambridge by providing easier access to stations, Cambridge North, Waterbeach, Cambridge South? How will that influence the development of the local economy? And we debated that Waterbeach Newtown might actually provide a little test bed, an example of how commuting, the interaction between development and commuting could actually be realised. So watching Waterbeach might actually be quite illustrative. Moving on to development strategy, we discussed, and in relation to the Cambridge Biomedical Campus, the need for a master plan, and that has been discussed in JDCC already. The notion of a master plan, I think, is particularly important. It's said that CBC has developed so far in a somewhat chaotic way, and that needs to be regularised. We had some discussions around government policy and mention of the term gentle density, and I think it behoves us to keep an eye on government policy and its change in relation to the local planning process. The members of Climate and Environmental Advisory Committee, and I think we would, in scrutiny overview, want to endorse that. We would like to be involved in the definition of the term unacceptable environmental harm, because it is used in the planning process and it needs to be defined. So that was under development strategy, and then very briefly on housing and infrastructure. Scrutiny and Overview has expressed this view before in regard to infrastructure, and that it is available from day zero. I think that might have come from both committee members, but our concern about infrastructure being available from day zero, because it so defines the shape of what's to come and the attitudes of the people who move into the homes and the businesses. And concern also over, and this would depend on economic circumstances, but the proper scope and aesthetics of the proposed developments would actually be realised in spite of economic pressures. So holding to perhaps our major objectives and delivering the right mix of housing for the right people will continue to be very important, and that could get lost somewhere along the way as the plan is developed. So just to summarise, the scrutiny overview, along with all these considerations and concerns that are included in the formal report, noted and supported the submission of this stage of the Greater Cambridge Local Plan to Cabinet today.
Thank you very much indeed for that very helpful summary. Right, so with Councillor Hawkins' permission, because I took the questions at scrutiny, I'll respond to some of those in a bit more detail. But Councillor Hawkins, do interject if you feel there's anything else you want to add. So just picking up some of the key points that you've made now verbally, but also in the written report that's in our agenda today. So starting off with that water, I mean, Councillor Hawkins has already referenced in her introduction that we're keeping a very close eye on what the Water Resources Management Plan is and on the timing of this. And I think she's made it clear that there absolutely will need to be a requirement for steps in delivery in order to make sure that the water supply is going to meet the need as well. Actually, if officers want to interject on anything, then please do feel free to, if you feel there's anything else that I need to say. So we've got ongoing discussions with the Environment Agency and with the water companies and our own consultants to understand how the Water Resources Management Plan is making provision for the planning decisions to go ahead. And, our firm commitment to infrastructure first it doesn't just mean roads and busways, it means water and electricity and all the rest of it. So, we cannot replicate mistakes of the past by having houses and employment sites built before there is the infrastructure to support them. So, that is a firm commitment. And you talked about whether there's examples where less water is required at the point of build. That certainly is. It is our intention, isn't it, Councillor Hawkins, that the per head water consumption will be less as a result of this local plan. And am I right in thinking that Eddington, as an example of where that's already been implemented, Councillor Hawkins?
I think for the first proposals, we're aiming for 80 litres per person per day, which is less than what is being done now. I'm not sure about what the level is at Eddington. 80 litres. 80.
Okay, so yes, that's already there, and is already in the plan. So moving on, you talked about concern regarding the impact of the proposed national policy changes on the appropriateness of identifying updated needs at this point. And again, Councillor Hawkins has talked about this. The MPPF is clear that councils still, will still need to identify objectively assessed need as the starting point for their plan preparation. But again, we made it clear that, if we haven't got that infrastructure, and very critically in terms of water, that actually, we will be having, and I think I said in the scrutiny meeting, we'll be having some really difficult discussions with government about it, because we simply cannot provide houses for which there is inadequate water, inadequate electricity, and inadequate transport infrastructure as well. So the next phase of the process is to determine if environmental and other constraints mean that we can meet that need. The changes to the MPPF, it's still being consulted upon at the moment, and I don't think the consultation finishes until March. Okay. And I'm certainly expecting some quite considerable amendments to what's being proposed at the moment. Certainly my role at the LGA, there's considerable pushback from the LGA on behalf of all political parties to some elements of this. But, you know, we will still be expected to produce local plans, but some of the detail will be changing. Is there anything you want to add to that, Councillor Hawkins, or officers? No? Okay, fine. So you said as far as development strategy is concerned, you need reassurances needed in considering sustainability impacts to identify development strategy. So again, we're quite clear that, you know, the strategy that we have taken thus far is the strategy that we are sticking to. So, you know, I think what we're proposing is probably the greenest local plan ever produced. We are not paying lip service to environmental considerations. Environmental considerations determine our strategy. So, you know, you referenced that there might be a need for further dispersal, but we're absolutely aware that dispersal to locations away from strategic infrastructure would be detrimental to the environment, and that is absolutely not our intention. So that's why, you know, we're looking at consolidation on the 3 sites that Councillor Hawkins referenced. We know that it's going to have to be a different sort of development in some of those places. You know, land is expensive, and buildings will have to be higher. If that's not the case, if you go for low-rise constantly, the consequence of that is more land release. So if we want to restrict land release, and particularly greenbelt land release, you know, what you have to do is build higher density, and that means, you know, if you're not going to build everything very close together, it has to go up in order to make sure that you're doing proper placemaking. So there are green spaces even in these more highly populated areas, and that's certainly what the plans have shown so far. Councillor Hawkins, do you want to add anything?
No, just to emphasise that, you know, as I said, first proposal strategy is still valid. It's still what we're holding to,
yeah.
Which is why we've raised these 3 strategic sites on the edge of Cambridge as being the most sustainable that we want to focus on and try and get everything in place so that we can get those out.
Thank you. And we know, you know, and we are not a council that's about building car-reliant homes and car-reliant businesses. We are about taking cars off the road because people don't need them, because they've got viable alternatives. So that's the strategy. Scrutiny talked about the impact of not delivering enough homes. Well, we know that. You know, we know that not providing homes and not providing growth, not providing space for jobs just drives up our already very, very high prices and causes people to go and live elsewhere where it's cheaper, and then increases commuting in. Or it drives businesses away. And we know that some, you know, major employers in our area, if we don't overcome the problems of congestion we have at the moment, and the lack of housing, and the lack of decent business space to meet their needs, they will relocate, and they won't relocate in the UK, they'll relocate abroad. So, you know, government is looking to us to make sure that we keep the Cambridge effect and we make that proper provision. But, you know, it's not simple. And, you know, if people are going to relocate here from places like Bristol and Reading, where there's a very attractive offer for them, they need to be able to afford to live here. So you said officers should provide a written definition of gentle density. Well, I think you know, I think Councillor Hawkins covered that. It's about making sure we're doing placemaking. We're not building, we're not doing the sort of development that happened post-war, which was just, you know, big lumps of concrete without any green space. That actually we're encouraging developers to build places where you or I would like to work or might like to live. My test is always, would my mum, could I let my mum live there? And we need to build places that we're proud of. So it's about, when we say gentle density, it means places where, you can see the sky, where there is greenness, where there is water. It's good, places that are good to be, because that's good for the environment, and it's good for health and well-being, very critically. You talked about the rationale for considering whether exceptional circumstances for Greenbelt release at the land south of Cambridge Biomedical Campus. Again, that decision, ultimately, the final decision doesn't rest with us. It's a high bar for exceptional circumstances, and it's down to the promoters to evidence that, both to our satisfaction and, I got it wrong in the meeting, didn't I? Secretary of State, ultimately, isn't it? Decision. Yes, I think so. Jonathan? Examination, thank you. All right. So it's a high bar, and it's not our duty to make sure that high bar is reached. It's the responsibility of the people who want to deliver the site. Right. So CEAC, Climate and Environment Advisory Committee, supported the climate-focused development strategy principle set out in the first proposals and sought confirmation that we're still using those. Well, yes. And they would like to be involved in confirming the definition of unacceptable environmental harm. Absolutely. I think that's a piece of work that actually, as a whole council, we need to understand what we mean by it, because I think it's probably not clearly defined. It's certainly not in national policy, but I think we need to know. So we'll talk further about that. And we were asked if conversations were being held with neighbouring districts about potentially meeting some of Greater Cambridge identified development needs. There is a duty to cooperate. I think the revisions of the MPPF are calling for that to be ditched. I think that's personally, I think that's a terrible mistake. We have close relationships with neighbouring councils, and absolutely we should be talking to them about, borders which aren't, they're not walls. They're just lines on maps. But we'll have to see what comes out of the government's revision there. And on housing, concern about the impact of proposed national changes to infrastructure funding mechanisms on infrastructure and affordable housing delivery. So government have suggested changes to the S106 process through the introduction of the SIL levy. We're still looking into what the implications for that are. I mean, when we first looked at it, years and years ago, my concern was it looked like parish councils were going to do really badly out of it. So at that time, parish councils did see some money from developers for play spaces and things like that. And what was in the original proposal actually saw them doing really badly out of it. And I think we need to make sure that money is still going to our parish councils, because actually they are very well placed to know how to spend money to benefit all of the residents being impacted by development. But again, I think that's an ongoing piece of work. Jonathan, is there anything you want to add to that? Because I don't really know an awful lot about where we are with this.
I'm afraid we also don't know that much about the levy, because it's very much still going through the process, but we'll try and keep track of its implications. That's lovely. Well, I'm sure Councillor Hortons will be up to speed and will be keeping us all briefed. And then concerned about the ability of councils to support delivery of a diverse range of housing type in the economic climate. So absolutely. So we have referenced in the past quite frequently the Letwin report, which showed that for developers, if they plan for a mix of housing types, it doesn't impact negatively on the uptake, the sale of the core market housing. But it means that far more people benefit from a better range of housing. So we are very committed to the findings of the Letwin report and making sure that we have a diverse range of housing, and we're not just building houses for millionaires, quite honestly, which is the risk at the moment. So we have a 40% affordable housing target within the new plan. The definition of affordable housing is quite broad now.
And some types of affordable housing work well in some places and don't in others. In my own village, shared equity is really popular. I know it's less popular in other places. So I think we need to make sure that we nuance this to, to where any development is happening. And I think that is everything. Councillor Hawkins, would you like to pick up anything that I've missed?
Just to add to that, of course, we have housing mix policy that we apply to new developments anyway, and always provides a mix of housing. So that is something that we'll be carrying on doing, as far as I know.
Absolutely, and we'll hear later about the success of our own council house building. Is there anything you'd like to come back on, Councillor Stobart?
Just one comment. Thank you for all those replies. I think the scrutiny overview process has, in a sense, delivered, and you've understood those concerns raised. I think there's just one, and it's a minor footnote, but probably worth mentioning, is the distinctively kind of Cambridge aspect to what we do. So there is, when we're surrounded by developers at a national, and the scope of things is national, we keep a theme which is decidedly Cambridge. Now that might be reflected in the business, in the way the strategic sites are developed, but that's just something that lurks in the background, that we make this place distinctive through the local plan. But just a footnote to finish. Thank you.
Thank you, and I think that is actually referenced by the government in their sort of Build Back Beautiful narrative and so on. And absolutely, it is a distinctive place, and I think communities want to see development that either adds because of its innovation, or reflects the local vernacular and so on. So I think that is, and I think our planners, and we have our design panel as well, and I think that they're very mindful of that. But Councillor Hawkins, is there more that you think we should be doing, building into the planning process?
I think we're doing as much as we possibly can at this point in time, and of course, we are looking out at what the government is planning on with the proposed changes, which might change things. But so far, so good. All I can say is thank you to the officers and the officer team. They've been brilliant.
Thank you. Okay. Yes. So we'll go back now to the agenda item and questions from Cabinet. Councillor Batchelor.
Just as a general comment on this, I think it's going to be a regular theme today from our budgeting point of view, that in many areas it's become very difficult to budget because of the uncertainty over government policies and the unreliability of the government in changing tack almost as a whim. So certainly in my area, in housing, it's been very difficult to project forward where you're dependent on the attitude of the government, whether you're going to get money or not. So I think we need to be aware of that.
Thank you. And there's certainly a lot of pushback on government, I think, from one of the mayors, Metro mayors in particular, about the fact that we're constantly bidding into thousands of different pots, and about pulling that together, and on the how difficult it makes us just having year-on-year settlements. We need to have longer settlements. So yeah, but that's a problem that's reflected by all councils, regardless of their political colour. We're all at the LGA certainly saying the same thing, that this is the situation at the moment is unsatisfactory and makes it very difficult for us. Thank you. Other cabinet members? No. Any questions from any other councillors? Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Leader. I've got 5 questions on agenda item 7. Would you like to take them together or in turn?
Do them one at a time, and then we can give them proper consideration.
So on page 22, table 1, we have the collective figures for the joint local plan. One thing that was expressed by some members was about a breakdown to give a rough guide as to what would be required in the district and the city. Just wondering whether Cabinet has thought on that, and whether we're likely to ever sort of see those figures separated out.
Okay, I'm going to, so we, the thing is, this is a joint local plan. So, my understanding is that, because it's a joint local plan, that's not really viable. But I am going to come to officers on this. And also, of course, it hasn't been decided as yet. So, I think that at some way down the line, we might be able to give something indicative, but absolutely not at this period of time, because it's not about allocating a certain number of houses to within the Cambridge city border and a certain number into the South Cambridgeshire border. It's about the joint local plan and meeting the need jointly. Jonathan, do you want to come in?
So I think this was a question also picked up at scrutiny, I recall. Yes, the response we gave was very much that the benefit of doing these joint plans, we look at Greater Cambridge as a whole. I haven't sought to split out need in that way, but look at the need of the area and plan for it in a comprehensive manner. Also, a number of the sites that I mentioned in this report, some of the major sites, are cross-boundary, and it very much depend on where those numbers were split across the lines of those boundaries. So no, we haven't done that split at this point.
Thank you. Next question.
So on that same time table, in response to the 2,463 annual rate, I'm wondering what mechanisms Cabinet really have to deliver that, because we're reliant on accelerated delivery rates, as the lead members mentioned, in places like Northstowe and Waterbeach. What securities, what measures do you have if developers get permissions and don't build on them? Because obviously our trajectory looks like it's reliant on these accelerated build-out rates, which potentially puts them more in the driving seat than us.
Thank you. So I will come to officers, but I just want to say, again, this is very much a theme at the LGA for all political parties about the fact that there's got to be some way, some punitive way of making developers with permissions build out. There's got to be something that stops them sitting on stuff or just building out very, very slowly. Now, we know developers build to the rate of the uptake of the market, and the market is volatile at the moment. But we need government legislation to actually allow us to, or which incentivises developers to build out at pre-specified rates. But Jonathan, can you add anything to that? And then I'll come to Councillor Hawkins, who might have something to say.
I think as officers, we're acutely aware that a sound plan needs to be a deliverable plan, and in order to demonstrate that, we have commissioned the housing delivery study, where you have an update as part of this agenda, and that has explored delivery around what are realistic and achievable rates around those sites and across the delivery strategy. So it is our aim, using a very carefully crafted evidence base, to demonstrate that the strategy we recommend to you is a deliverable one.
Thank you, Jonathan. Councillor Hawkins, nothing to add? No, okay, all right. Crack on.
Thank you, Leader. My next question refers to something you said about parish councils and about SIL not being... Sorry, Councillor John Batchers, I'm trying to look around. Now, some parish councils, because of their size, don't see, thankfully, the levels of development, because they're be unsustainable. But it does mean currently they get nothing at all because they don't qualify for 106. So is that something that, in your considerations and looking at 106, that you are taking into consideration?
So if a parish council sees development, then it gets Section 106 money. The government, of course, changed the rules for developments of less than 10 houses. That's out. I thought that was a terrible mistake, and I think a lot of little parish councils thought that was a mistake, but that's what government did. If parishes are not seeing development, then they won't get anything because they're not getting development. Yeah, please do.
Thank you. I'll clarify the question. So what I'm saying is some parishes don't see development that reach that threshold, but something like a SIL potentially would enable them to get something. Is that something that you're considering when you're having your discussions about SIL and 106, etc.
Okay, so I think the discussions on SIL are early days. I think we're still waiting for direction from government. So the answer is I don't know. And I think it'd be unfair for me to put officers on the spot as well, because I don't think we know. But I think, though, as things are clarified by government, I think we can enter into discussions about how that works. Because I think the whole point with SIL is that you identify projects in advance, and it could be projects that benefit a number of villages. So I'm sure there's ways about it, but the answer is I don't know at the moment. Do you want to add anything, Councillor Hawkins?
Just to say, until the government comes up with the plans for what they want to do with the infrastructure levy, we can't give a specific answer as to whether or not parishes or parish councils will get something depending on their size.
Jonathan?
I'll just echo that issue. One of the issues we've got in looking at what mechanism we use is we really need to understand what's coming out of the SIL. It has created uncertainty in terms of the levy and the changes coming out. I think we'll continue to monitor it as officers to make recommendations to you, but we really need to understand where that levy is going and depending how much time we invest in looking at SIL in the current system.
Thank you. I hope that helps.
So I think if I can just ascertain the response, my question was whether the council, whether Cabinet were considering it in their representations. So I'll take it that you are?
So the Cabinet have not as yet discussed SIL because we don't know what it looks like yet. Cabinet will discuss SIL and how it is used in South Cambridgeshire once we have the detail from government about what it's going to be. As it is, I don't know what it's like.
Okay, thank you, Lead. And my last question before a plea that when you do have those conversations, that you do bear in mind those parishes that currently aren't qualifying. My last question relates to page 26, paragraph 33, and the fourth bullet point down. Second to last question. This is where it says about the removal from the green belt, and I'm wondering how Cabinet is sort of justifying that in relation to a motion that we passed in July 2020, the motion that stood in the name of Councillor Nick Wright, that the District Council was committed to the promotion of exception sites, but is dedicated to protecting the green belt in the emerging local plan. So we passed a motion which was supported by all in the chamber, of all parties, that we were going to protect the green belt, and now in the document it says about releasing green belt for development. So I'm wondering whether that motion was considered in your decision making. And then, apologies, Chair, I lost count. I do have one more.
Thank you. So nothing's changed. We are still. It's still our intention to protect the green belt. The legislation says that green belt can only be released if those exceptional circumstances are met. That's the rules. And they're the government's rules, and they're the ones that we'll stick by.
Leader, do you accept there is a choice of the council and the local plan whether we apply to release greenbelt or not through the local plan process?
Sorry, I don't quite understand what you're saying. Are you saying that we ourselves put forward greenbelt, which doesn't meet exceptional circumstances? I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure what you're saying.
So I'm saying this says, and continue to work exploring the case of the allocation of additional land to the south and its removal from the green belt. So the local plan requires removal of green belt, reducing green belt. That's something that this council in this document is pursuing. So that's not a government decision, that's a decision of the council. And I'm challenging whether that actually complies with the motion we passed previously, where we said we're going to protect the green belt. One would assume that you're protecting it in its entirety, not protecting it and then changing it and removing some.
So we have to conform to national planning policy, and we are not deviating from national planning policy. And the government are supportive of the protection of the green belt. We are supportive of protection of the green belt, but the legislation says if a case can be made for exceptional circumstances, then we are obligated to allow its release. So nothing's changed. We are abiding by national planning policy. on this. So nothing's changed. Councillor Hawkins, do you want to add anything? And then I'll come to Jonathan.
Perhaps only to say, even though we are still protecting, and we, yes, we agree we will protect the green belt, it doesn't mean that nothing cannot happen in the green belt if it needs to happen. But if it does have to happen, then there's exceptional circumstances to be met. I'm sorry, but I do not see that there's a contradiction there.
Jonathan.
Just to be clear, in the decision on the strategy update we're taking today at the biomedical campus, the first proposals put forward consulted on whether there should be a further release from the green belt, reflecting the very specific needs of the campus and as part of the wider Cambridge area. We've received comments on that through the consultation, and we're still exploring the evidence related to that to understand whether that exceptional circumstance exists, and we will come back to members at the next stage and provide the evidence in order that decision can be made. But that green belt release was very much based around a specific case being explored about the needs and the special circumstances around the campus.
Councillor Williams, you've got one more, have you?
Yes, Leader. So this really is the last one this time. So 40% affordable housing, and that is something that I think we all agree on and we all identify is needed. But we also know, those who sit on planning committee especially, that on strategic sites, achieving 40% is extremely difficult. So, for example, Water Beach was at 30%. And with the local plan the way it is, and having such larger sites, which I understand for environmental purposes and the higher density, but how is the Cabinet, what is your plan to deal with the issues that arises in trying to ascertain the 40% affordable housing? Because we know that on these bigger sites, it's incredibly hard to get. So my concern is although there are good reasons, it's sort of trade-offs, isn't it, a lot of the time what we're doing. Although having that high density is good for that purpose, how do we make sure we actually get 40% affordable housing?
Thank you. And you're quite right. It's really hard. And it's really hard when developers are responsible for providing schools and doctor surgeries and roads and so on. What I hope is that the sites that have been identified, because they're already well connected, and because the GCP proposals are going to be very significant in putting in the physical infrastructure there, that there will be less of a draw on the developer's pocket to provide things like roads and roundabouts and so on, and that means that we have a greater chance of achieving our 40% target, which, as you say, is really important to all of us, particularly with house prices only going one way in this area. So, undoubtedly, if the plan was to, such as Northstowe, where there was no infrastructure at all, and major roadways had to be put in, at massive cost, by keeping significant new development close in and around Cambridge, a lot of that infrastructure is already there. And again, that's when we talk about sustainable, it's environmentally sustainable, but it also hopefully means that it's more financially sustainable as well. So there will be difficult negotiations, but we're setting a high target, in the expectation that we will achieve that. We will achieve that high target wherever possible. Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you. Also, just to say, I think whilst I'm not sure of the specific details, I know that we have currently a review process for looking at later phases of development on Water Beach. And that's something that we will be extending, obviously, to newer sites or newer strategic sites as they come up. So there will be ways of making sure that we try and get as much of the 40% as is possible as those sites get delivered over the 10 to 15 years.
Jonathan.
Just to finish that point as well, as officers we also commission viability evidence, so at the next stage we'll be updating the viability evidence that accompanies the local plan. So hopefully we'll be able to demonstrate what the implications of the plan as a whole has in terms of viability. But yes, it is challenging. There are a lot of demands on the value coming out of development, but we hope we can demonstrate, again, a deliverable plan.
Thank you. That's going to be a really interesting piece of work. So thank you very much, much indeed. I hope that provides a bit of reassurance. Okay, are there any more questions? No? We have a member of the public. If a member of the public wants to ask anything, then please do. You'd be welcome to. Okay, right. I'm not going to read out all the recommendations because they are many, but they are on page 818. Right, do members agree with the proposals as presented in the paper? Thank you. Anyone wish to vote against? Anyone wish to abstain? So Cabinet therefore agrees the proposals by affirmation. Thank you. So moving on to the draft regional water resources plan for Eastern England consultation response. And Councillor Peter MacDonald is going to present this, and I think Councillor Henry Batchelor is going to second it. So Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you, Leader. This is, of course, a joint submission, both from South Cambridgeshire and the City. And from both authorities, it makes it clear about our concerns in water supplies going forward. So we do, as both councils, support the demand-side measures, which are covered in the report or the submission to WRE, and hope that those can be brought forward as soon as possible. We're also calling for an aspiration of good ecological status in all water bodies, which is very top of mind, I think, for a lot of residents in South Cambs. And this, especially, that is focused on chalk streams in our area, of which there are many, and we've seen impacts through climate change, especially last summer. So a key part of the report, we talk about the Anglian water provision, the time-limited provision of supply until 2030. That was also mentioned by Councillor Hawkins, and the Fens Reservoir project, hopefully coming on stream from 2035 to 37, or earlier if possible. Water quality features in the submission as well as quantity. And additionally, we talk about soil management in the context of agriculture, and that's addressed as part of the ELMS announcement by government in June 2022. So I believe that we have given this a great deal of thought amongst members, and appreciate the work that John and other officers have done on this. And we do ask Cabinet to support the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Batchelor, do you want to speak on this?
I mean, I won't go into too much detail, Leader, but just to reiterate what Councillor MacDonald was saying, it's, you know, the Council has given a lot of thought to the responses, as you know, we've just heard, has significant implications, particularly on house building in the area, and I think the proposed response that we have in front of us today really does hammer home that to Water Resources East. So, yeah, I would echo Councillor MacDonald's support of this proposed response and of the recommendations in the papers, so I'm perfectly happy to second.
Thank you very much. And obviously this is a joint response between us and Cambridge City, which is, you know, always needs quite a lot more officer work to do, but I think has been very successfully achieved. So the summary is that we have serious, significant concerns about water issues. So hopefully that's been, well, I'm confident that's been very well communicated through this response. Any questions on this from Cabinet members? No. Councillor Ellington.
Thank you, Chairman. Leader, I think my concern is that I was at a meeting with the Environment Agency and Anglia Water last Friday, and where there is water, there is sewage, and there is outflow from that sewage plant. And it is the water management that I want to emphasise and ask members to emphasise. I was intrigued and irritated by the fact that Anglia Water are saying that the main problem with the outflow of water is that people are building extensions and houses and putting the water into the sewage rather than surface water disposal. And they gave the distinct impression that the water that comes from Camborne and Northstowe would, yes, include surface water, but there would be a junction somewhere where the water that came from surface water goes one way and the water that is effluent goes the other way. Now, and therefore, it wasn't their fault that there was too much water coming out of Uttonstrove sewage works and going to Webb's Hole Sluice. And they are going to have a plan one day to decide how they're going to deal with all this extra water. So can I ask Council to consider not only where they're getting the water from for all our development, but where it's going afterwards, because it is a distinct problem, and already Uttonstrove have been sent a letter by the Environment Agency that they are putting too much water through the system.
Okay, so we're all aware that there is a significant national problem of outflow of raw sewage into our rivers. The newspapers have been full of it. Yours is quite specific, so I think we'll go back and we'll just do a little bit of research and give you a written answer that's more specific to the case that you've brought up, because I don't think, maybe Jonathan has the information at his fingertips?
I think I would just refer back to the council agreed a response to the drainage and wastewater management plan several months ago, and I believe the council's echoed concerns around making sure that proper infrastructure is in place and so on. So it probably is for a separate report, I'm afraid, but yes, I think the council has echoed those concerns previously.
Thank you. So we'll come back to you on that. So thank you very much indeed. Councillor MacDonald, did you want to say anything on that subject?
No, I think Sue, Councillor Enton's raised something quite specific, so hopefully a quite specific answer rather than something general would be more helpful.
Thank you very much. Any more questions? No, in which case we'll go to the recommendations, which are detailed on page 32. Right, so do members agree with the proposals? Thank you. Anyone wish to vote against? Anyone wish to abstain? So Cabinet therefore agrees the proposals by affirmation. Now going on to item 9, which is the new build council housing strategy 2020 to 25 update, and Councillor John Batchelor is going to present this, and Councillor John Williams is going to second it. So over to Councillor Batchelor. Sorry, Councillor Batchelor, sorry.
Thank you. This one.
This one, yes, sorry. Got a brace of them here.
Thank you, Leader. First, I need to we need to approve an amendment. The amendment is that, yes, find it, that Cabinet recommend to Council to approve the updates of the new build council housing strategy 2020 to 25. The actual recommendations, the two recommendations remain the same. Can I just move that, please?
Right. So this is, rather than being a decision being taken by Cabinet today, this is a recommendation that goes to full council. So does everyone agree with that? Oh, I'm sorry, I need a seconder for that. John Williams is going to second it. Everyone agreed? Anyone vote against? Anyone abstain? So we agree the amendment. We agree with the amendment. Jolly good. Okay, so back to you, Councillor Batchelor.
Thank you very much. So this is a good news story. We are having to revise our housing strategy because we have actually met the objectives well in advance of the original plan. So the update really is only about two issues, and that is the annual target for the number of new homes that we bring forward. That is currently a target of 70. We are proposing that should go to 75 per year. We are also asking that the modelling period of payback, i.e. the formula for assessing the viability of projects, be extended from the current 35 years to 45 years. It should be made plain that this is in order to give us some flexibility. We will continue to actually use the 35-year formula as the fallback position, but the way that this works is that we have to bid on the open market, and we have competitors whose formula is really quite different. Certain housing associations use a formula of something of the order of 50 years, which makes their capacity in terms of the amount that they can pay for housing is significantly higher. We don't anticipate going to 45 years, but it's there as the fallback position. So there are also a number of minor changes, which you'll find under paragraph 12. There's a very long list of those, which I won't go through in detail, but they're largely updating with changed situations, which many of us are already well aware of. So I'm happy to recommend this to Cabinet, and I should say that this is a huge achievement by Kirsten and her team, who have done a brilliant professional job and are continuing to do an excellent job on behalf of the council in a quite difficult business atmosphere. So I recommend the recommendations to Cabinet.
Thank you very much, Councillor Batchelor. Councillor Williams?
Thank you, Leader. I'm very, very happy to second this. I think it's absolutely impressive performance by our housing team to achieve the numbers that we're now seeing. After just 4 years, we've doubled from 35 to 70 was our target, and we've actually built over 80 council homes. And that, going forward, we're increasing that target to 75, and I'm sure we're going to improve on that even. It's amazing because we suffer from a lack of owning our own land, and that has been an enormous issue for us. But I'm pleased that we did agree to, and we have now purchased land opposite this, these offices to build more houses in Camborne. But I think it's absolutely amazing, given that we don't have an awful lot of land that we can build on, and that we've achieved such astonishing targets. And this is all for the benefit of our residents, those who cannot afford to buy their own property or cannot afford the private rented market rates. So I'm very pleased to second this.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Milnes?
Yeah, thank you, Leader. I just wanted to say something of the direct impact on our local residents of this success in our building. And in Sawston, where I'm the member, or one of the members, we've just taken receipt of a combination of mixed ownership and further council properties. In total, that site in Sawston is providing 60 council housing with a preference and a priority to people with a local connection. So this is a real boon when property is very difficult to obtain for particularly young families who can't afford the outrageous average price house pricing in the Cambridge area. And I'd like to just add my thanks and applaud the efforts of our housing team.
Thank you very much indeed, yes. So, well, you know, Kirsten and her team have done a fabulous job here, and, you know, particularly on exception sites in villages, it helps keep our villages diverse, because otherwise they just become full of older people, I'm afraid, and having council housing there, fortunately, increases the range of people who can live there, which keeps places vibrant and alive. Are there any other questions? Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Leader. And I think housing is one of those, council housing, one of those subjects that we tend to be able to agree on. And I do think actually, historically, one of the strengths is council housing is that we kept our council housing, which other councils didn't. And I think we're all very grateful that that decision was made. I think it's also very sensible to look at the more long term. You know, we're not a business that's looking at certain periods of time. So to make it 45 years is a sensible approach. The only thing I would just ask is whether, because we have the right to buy, and whether that has, we will be taking into consideration any potential sort of sales and how that affects, if we're looking at more long term, and the discounts that are applicable to minimise any potential losses by taking that approach. Just to ask that that's being considered when making purchases and looking at the assessments.
Thank you. I'm going to come to Councillor Batchelor, but again, I think that's government policy, which is outside of our hands. But yes, I see officers are popping up on the screen as well, but I'll go to Councillor Batchelor first, and then if he wants to defer to officers, then please do.
Yes, so yeah, of course, right to buy is a legal obligation and is still effective. I mean, I'm glad to say it's not running at the same level as it has done in the past. It's worth remembering when actually this legislation for right to buy was brought in, we had the best part of 9,000 houses. We now have 5,500 or 600. And so there's been a steady decline, again, mostly about government policy, in that for long periods we weren't allowed to actually replace the social housing. And in fact, they took away our responsibility for building social housing for long periods. So there's difficulties there. Right to buy is running between 20 and 30 properties per year. So we are in the plus side. Hopefully we are adding overall something probably of the order of about 40 houses each year. And we intend to continue to do that as long as we can fund it and it meets the formula. So yes, we keep all that in mind. Equally, with the 106 issue and the uncertainty that the government's managed to create yet again with looking at that area, almost all of the houses we bring on board are 106 projects. And if that changed, then our whole approach to how we actually purchase affordable housing would have to be looked at again. So, another complication on the horizon. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Peter Campbell would like to come in.
Yeah, just a quick one. What John's mentioned, so Councillor Batchelor mentioned, is absolutely right. I just draw members' attention to paragraph 9 on page 61 of the report about risk management, which makes specific reference to the cost floor calculation as part of the right to buy, whereas properties are not excluded from the right to buy, but if they're sold in the first 15 years, we recover the cost of acquisition. So that gives a degree of protection. And also to remind members that over recent years, we have been building and acquiring more properties than we have sold. So we have been growing the housing stock.
Thank you very much indeed. Any more questions? No. Okay, so we'll come to the recommendations, which are on page 49. The Cabinet approves the update. Oh, sorry, the recommend to Council, thank you. It's recommended that Cabinet recommends to Council the new build council housing strategy 2020 to 25, including setting the target annual completions for 23 to 24 and 24 to 25 at 75 homes per year, and be increasing the modelling period for payback from 35 to 45 years. So do members agree with the proposal? Anyone wish to vote against? Anyone wish to abstain? Yep, jolly good. Cabinet therefore agrees the proposals by affirmation. Thank you very much, Peter and Kirsten. Thank you. So moving on to item 11 is the capital strategy. So I'm moving on to all things finance now. So Councillor... Oh, I've missed the business plan. How can I miss the business plan? It's item 10. Right, the most important thing. The business plan. Right. Thank you. Apologies. So I'm going to present this, and Councillor Brian Milnes is going to second it, and we've had quite a lot of feedback from scrutiny of overview on this, which I'll come to Councillor Stobart about. So the revised business plan has gone through a number of iterations, but very much builds on the previous plan. We are sticking to our priorities of being green to our core and building houses that are affordable for everyone to live in, of supporting local businesses with particular focus on SMEs, and of ensuring that we are a modern and caring council. So, we've been incredibly successful in ticking stuff off. We've done an awful lot of stuff. The transformation work that Jeff Membry has been leading on has delivered massive benefits. So lots of progress has been made, and it's just important that we keep the impetus up. So I think this is the document is very well set out. It's very clear. See what we're doing. We have clear targets, and hopefully it will give us good preparation as we move forward to the next stage. So if I could just ask Councillor Milnes to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm happy to second this. We've been through several iterations of our business plan, and this continues the good work in that direction. I think if at your discretion, Leader, I would quite like to hear the comments from scrutiny first before coming back and responding to their fairly sterling work in this respect. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a good suggestion. Councillor Stobart, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. So we looked at the business plan, same meeting as we discussed the draft budget. This had a different character, I think, to our previous scrutiny of the local plan, in that there was a lot of detail discussed. So I'll try to pull out, and I think the report covers it well, but to give you that kind of higher level view of some of our concerns, and I'll deep dive into some of the details. We were concerned about context. So understanding the context in relation to the significance of figures stated. So sometimes we were lacking context. And I think in the discussion we were satisfied that context was established. But in regard to numerical value, sometimes targets were presented, so good targets, but expressed qualitatively. And we thought that there should be numbers, and in the case, for example, of housing upgrades, that the quality of the housing upgrade, now it's asking a lot to say this would be a passive house upgrade or whatever, but there should be some numbers around things like upgrades so that we can actually comment sensibly and then make appropriate recommendations. So in a little bit more, perhaps some of the specific things that came up, were there going to be homes for refugees included in the aim to build 75 new council homes per year. In relation to installing double glazing the solar panels at existing council homes, so that was the context of the discussion about standards. There was an urge from colleagues on scrutiny and overview to maximise. Now, that has to be set in context of available budgets, but a reasonable maximisation of that kind of effort, but against targets, so that, apart from anything else, the effort is quantified. We're concerned about threats to mobile warden schemes. So this is a kind of creeping cost effect, where suddenly one day we realise that, well, we can no longer support that because the costs have been coming up, and suddenly that's unaffordable. So mobile warden schemes came up for some discussion. Supporting nascent high streets. So in the big developments, I think we referred to, of course, Cambourne and North Stowe, but elsewhere where there are, in a sense, high streets that have been neglected, or there is potential for high streets, that we should be supporting that. And of course, there are things coming up like the Shared Prosperity Fund for high street support, which we're aware of. And reaching needy people. We wanted through scrutiny overview, so there were various actions without going into great detail, but there has been a big effort to reach needy people. But we really wanted to put the emphasis, and I suppose we're reacting from what we're seeing at parish level, where some of the parish council members we deal with are saying, well, actually, you can't. People are put off by, and I will quote, walls of words, and we spend some time communicating and helping parish councillors to relate to some of the initiatives that are being proposed. So I think that's a continuing effort, and we would note that there has been progress, but it needs to continue. So just to say there was a lot of detail, and they were some of the themes and some of the specifics, and I think the list that's presented in the report is perhaps a little more complete, but I hope, Leader, that gives an impression of what we discussed.
Thank you. So, Councillor Mills, if you'll just forgive me, and I'm going to go through some formal responses to key points, and then come back to you, and then I'm going to ask Councillor Handley to talk about homes for refugees, and I'm going to ask Councillor MacDonald to talk about support for the high streets, and then, but obviously all cabinet members are welcome to contribute. So your concern about context, I think where we can possibly do better is to, I think what scrutiny might have missed is that very often behind these numbers, there are actually policy or strategy papers sitting behind. So, what we want is a published plan that's accessible for people. And if it's massive, then actually nobody's going to be interested in it. So, I mean, I'm very pleased with the way this is presented, because I think it uses plain English, which was something that, we were very keen to make sure was introduced five years ago. And I think we've been really successful, that it is something that a member of the public might pick up and read. And if there's too much detail there, actually it'll just switch people off. But I think very often there are other documents sitting behind, and I think we can put in the links to so that scrutiny who wants to look in more detail can go behind the figures. All right, because figures are never arbitrary. There's always something behind them. So on the issue of the 75 new council homes a year, so those are not homes which will be funded by the refugees grants. Those are quite clearly they're council houses, and we've just done the paper that sits behind that. So the work that's going on for refugees is something completely different, and I'm sorry that got lost somewhere along the way. You talk about double glazing. Well, actually all of our properties have double glazing. as a minimum at the moment. And since 2015, we've actually been installing triple glazing units and composite doors as standard as part of our planned maintenance programme. So again, I think, sitting behind this is the detail of what our planned maintenance programme is. Our properties all have efficient heating systems, and where there are old electric, solid fuel or oil systems, we're replacing them wherever possible, and we're replacing them with air source heat pumps, which of course are much more beneficial for the environment and hopefully cheaper for people to run. Councillor Batchelor might like to add some detail there. So they all have double glazing, all right? What we're now doing is triple glazing. So again, we need the reference to that. You asked for better information on the website to help parish and town councils understand the support available to them in providing electric vehicle charging points, and you talked about barriers of walls of words. Well, I would argue that actually our job as local members is to help our parish councils battle their way through the bureaucracy, but actually I don't think we can have done more on this one. So there was a section in the November parish bulletin all about how parish councils can apply for this, and that went out at the end of November. And then towards the end of last year, we actually issued a news release, which had really good local coverage on this, and that was in the Independent, Cambridge Live, Cambridge News, and on BBC Radio Cambridge, and That's TV, and the Cambridge Network. And there's been lots of reminders about it on the council's own social media channels. And then before the launch of the EV grant scheme, we had attached an article about EV charging into the autumn 22 edition of the South Cambs magazine. So we'd already flagged it there. And that was delivered to 70,000 households across the district. So they all got flagged that this was coming. And we gave a presentation on the grant to the parish liaison meeting, which is usually really well attended by parish clerks. And we ran an article in the December issue of the Zero Carbon Communities newsletter. And more generally, there's an email inbox about the grant through which we've spoken to several parishes, and we've set up Teams calls from them and offered them advice on the grant and EV charging generally. And actually on the website, it's a pretty clear header there, which is a link to all this stuff. So I don't really think we could have done more than we have done to actually, flag up this EV grant. Councillor Milnes, you want to interject on this one?
Well, no, I was just going to reinforce the fact that the parish, as my own parish, has 2 applications in from both the parish and community organisation for this. So the original grant available is only a total of 20,000 this financial year. So I think we may well find that's at least taken up as a minimum, and I think we'll get a lot more next financial year.
Yeah. And of course, we now have our EV charging, which are in the car park here, which I think is going to be available any second. I certainly hope it is, because I've come in with very low charge today. So another item said supports an ambition as a headline objective, encouraging residents to reduce total waste materials generated. And actually, I will bring in Councillor Henry Batchelor on this as well. And officers are asked to develop this objective to looking at best practice. Now, there's a DEFRA proposed target of reducing residual waste per capita by 50% of 2019 levels by 2042, which is actually quite a long time away. Once that target's finalised, the waste policy team will develop intermediate target proposals for the nearer term, such as 2025, 2030 and so on, to serve as key goals for the circular resource strategy. And Councillor Batchelor might be able to talk more about that. However, there's no practical and proven methodology yet to directly link or ascribe residual waste reduction to behavioural change interventions, as there are always several compounding factors. But it's something we do all the time, and I remember prior to COVID, or maybe it was actually almost during COVID, being at Milton Country Park, where our team were there, with a stall, handing out stuff to people, encouraging people face to face to do things to reduce their own waste. So it's a constant piece of work that we do. But I'll ask Councillor Batchelor to come in at the end and talk about that. And then scrutiny requested Cabinet take urgent action to protect the viability of mobile warden schemes in South Cambridgeshire in the light of significantly increased costs. Well, obviously, Age UK delivering these schemes for us. So again, it's partly out of our control. We're the funders, but we are in the process of a planned review of the mobile warden schemes as the additional 200,000 project investment comes to an end at 23-24. So, you know, we need to review it. Councillor John Williams might want to comment. You know, it's got to demonstrate, it's got to, and Councillor Bill Handley, it's got to demonstrate value for money, and we need to look at ways of, you know, how can we do it better? How can the money be better spent? How can it have more reach? But I'll ask you to comment. Then urges Cabinet to make sure that Council continue to offer residents an ever-improving array of ways in which to contact it by telephone. So a lot of work's been gone into this, and Jeff Membry's been doing lots of work to make sure that we're using really cutting-edge technology to make sure that people can always contact us by phone and they're not sitting listening to terribly irritating music for hours on end, which send us all into conniptions. So we've got this golden number and we've got callback arrangements now. So those are already implemented. And we're looking at other emerging technologies which will really enhance the customer experience and provide an increase in telephone contact hours. So that's already in the plan. You referenced about the high streets of Camborne and Northstowe. The business plan's been updated to include fledgling high streets. So that was in the business plan. And we'll continue to use you know, what are sometimes limited resources to make sure we support the high streets. Because they're absolutely critical to many of our villages, particularly as we see a reduction in public transport at the moment. Having a little village co-op or spa or something can make all the difference in the world to people who are otherwise isolated. And then I did smile when I emphasised the importance of monitoring the 4-day week trial, including where officers continue to work 5 days a week. Because I hope we made it really clear that actually, you know, the monitoring of this is absolutely critical to whether we know whether it's been a success or not. And a lot of initial work was done. I think there's, you know, the health and well-being of staff is fairly constantly being monitored. And, you know, we said all along that if we saw a downturn in performance, then things would be halted. I've talked to quite a few officers. I'm getting some really nice feedback from officers about how that one day off, they come back feeling like they've had a bit of a holiday, and you know, they feel far more motivated. So, you know, the people I've spoken to, I'm getting very positive feedback from. So, you know, of course this will be carefully monitored. And you know, obviously we have people such as our legal team who continue to work 5 days a week, and you know, there's I think a sophisticated piece of work to go on there to make sure that all services are functioning as well as each other. I'm going to go round each cabinet member, if I may, to ask them if they want to pick up on anything. If I start with Councillor Henry Batchelor.
Sure, thank you, Leader. So just picking up on the point you mentioned at the start regarding the new DEFRA targets for reducing household waste generated. Yeah, obviously that is something we as a council and as a collection authority will be striving towards, albeit I think as has been mentioned, 90% of that work will be trying to change human behaviour, which, you know, as I think we know, isn't always going to be the easiest or the quickest change to make, but obviously needless to say, it's something that the council is very much committed to doing. What we are waiting for at the moment is for DEFRA to confirm that proposed target of 2042 and a 50% reduction in household waste is achieved by that date. Once that is, we can then internally essentially benchmark and have, you know, sort of shorter term goals on our route to achieving that. So it's absolutely something we're committed to doing as an authority. But yeah, as I said, 90% of it is going to try and change people's behaviour. So, you know, that's through marketing. The leader mentioned outreach events we've had at Milton Country Park, for example. So it will be a challenge, but I'm certain it's one we as an authority are up for. And I see Bode's appeared, but if I could just have one more thing, then one more comment, then I'll pass over to him. And that is just to bang the drum, if I can, about something in the action plan that relates to my portfolio. And that is around the greening of the council's own estate and operations. Obviously, one of our main our main aims is to be green to the core, and I think it would be quite hypocritical of us if we weren't, if we didn't start that in-house. So just to promote what we are doing there, obviously we are trying to green our own fleet, so our own vehicles, starting with the refuse vehicles. We currently have another electric refuse bin on order and are about to place an order for another one, so that is on the way. I think it's been mentioned earlier. The greening to the building here is underway now, and the new car park with electric charging points is now open, and underneath the car park obviously is our ground source heat pumps, albeit has arrived a bit later than anticipated, but albeit it is now operational. And we do have the EV charging project that is coming forward at our own waste depot. So all that is online, and I'm hoping does feed into the council's own aim of being green to the core. So I just wanted to bang the drum for that particular point in the business plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Bodo, do you want to add anything to that?
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Nothing further for me to add. I can answer any questions if there's any, but no further points to add. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you, Leader. I think the specific feedback on scrutiny was around, with regard to business, was the so-called fledgling high streets. So we do take that on board, and the officer team is taking that on board. What we've tried to do in the business plan is be as specific as possible with the KPIs, with the key performance indicators in terms of what we're trying to do, and we would also apply that to the so-called fledgling high streets. And the final point is that we are hoping to deploy the Shared Prosperity Fund. That's over the next 2 years. So we are, as we said at scrutiny, we're open-minded on which high streets and how we deploy those funds. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Leader. On the monitoring of the trial, we have the Bennett Institute from Cambridge University who are now helping us with that. And as you said, the whole principle of the 3 months that we're now in the trial period is to gain evidence and to see how it is delivered, and to inform our decision that we'll make in May. But I would say that we are, the champions of local government in this. I think we are the only public service organisation that is doing this. A number in the private sector, but this is the first public sector. And we have a lot of eyes on us. And I'd assure you that in those circumstances, we're going to make sure that everything is properly monitored, so that when we do make our decision in May, it is the right decision. And I'm sure if we decide to continue, others will follow.
Thank you. Councillor Mills.
Just a couple of things to add. The government legislation that's coming forward in terms of waste includes proposals for a weekly food waste collection. And my colleague, Councillor Henry Batchelor, will have the difficulty of working out the impacts of that, because there's clearly cost implications of that. But in general terms, food waste is a huge contributor to global warming. The climate change, we waste some 35% of our food that we take out of the ground. Actually, we leave quite a lot of it in the ground as well, because the agricultural sector, for example, has to have contingency in its contracts for the supermarkets, for example. So this is a whole area that's going to come and challenge us in that arena. I just repeat our policy of generating renewable energy across our estate wherever possible, and this is going wider into the whole of Cambridgeshire to do that. The lack of charging points is a real problem, particularly in rural areas, which is what our scheme that we mentioned before looks to help address. And that's all I'd like to comment on for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hawkins, was there anything planning related? not sure there was
I
actually.
think we've said a lot already.
We've done planning.
All I can say is that we'll continue to work on our local plan to ensure that we build homes where
Thank
our
you very
communities
much.
want them and how they want them.
Thank you, Councillor Handley.
Thank you, Leader. First of all, a comment on the mobile warden scheme, which was raised by the Scrutiny Committee. Obviously, costs are going up. Age UK's costs are going up, and I am aware Councillor Ellington has raised concern with me about the effects it's having on her scheme in the Swavesey scheme, and we are looking at that and we're seeing what we can do. What is happening at the moment is that the County Council, sort of in line with the changes to the integrated care system, are looking at different ways of providing this kind of service. What we want to do is to make sure that we work with them, we don't duplicate. I'm speaking with Councillor van der Ven, who's chair of the Health and Wellbeing Committee, and I've also been speaking with county council officers. Need to make sure that they understand what we are trying to achieve, as well as what they are trying to achieve, and work together. So I'll no doubt be coming back to you, to Cabinet, with some recommendations in the coming weeks.
Good, and I think I think we might arrange for scrutiny to have a little briefing on what the recommendations are, because this is very important to all of us, particularly looking ahead, seeing how we work with the ICS on this sort of thing, so that we don't get duplication of services there. So I think we'll think about some, at the right time, presentation to scrutiny of an overview, and maybe even more broadly than that.
Very happy to do that.
Did you want to say anything about the refugees?
Well, we're talking about, we're on the agenda item, which is, the business plan. It would be really easy to overlook the huge amount of work that our officers have been putting in on the Homes for Ukraine front. A year ago, we didn't know any of this was going to happen. Our officers responded, their response was just fantastic. I mean, really was, really, really good. And they've had to cope with changing circumstances, changing policies from the government. And that's no criticism of the government, things, they were working on the hoof as well. What we have done, we've had lots of really kind messages back saying how much the work of our officers at the council has been appreciated by the Ukrainians themselves and by the hosts. One final thought, though, is that we do have a problem in that not every host can continue past the 6 months or past the year mark, and we are engaging still in a project to try and recruit more, because what we would like to do is to relocate Ukrainian guests to a place quite close to where they are already, for obvious reasons. They've got children in school, they've got jobs, some of them. So we're working hard on that, but we're not, I wouldn't say we're really optimistic that we can deliver as good a service as we might want to, but we are working hard to try and do that.
Thank you. And my sense from talking to other people is that actually what we provide here is very, very much superior to what refugees are experiencing in very many other parts of the country. It really is the gold standard here.
Other councils are looking at what we do and trying to emulate it.
Yeah, exactly. And this is down to the leadership of this council and our officers who are still dealing with COVID and then had to start dealing with Ukraine as well. So I get lovely comments regularly from hosts saying how impressed they are with the copious amounts of support they get, and the fact that we're always on the end of the phone to answer any questions. So yeah, sometimes we forget to kind of pat ourselves on the back and when we've done something really well. Councillor Batchelor.
Thank you very much, Leader. Could I just echo what Bill and you have just been saying? The Communities Department and Housing work very closely together and have put in a huge amount of work to support the refugees. To the specifics, I just want to add a little more detail perhaps to the subsidy money coming from government for refugee housing. So this is for 30 houses, 28 for Ukrainians and 2 for Afghans. The Afghans require much larger housing, and that's why there's a specific arrangement there. We're now just starting to get the detail of what the government's actually proposing, as we've only known about this for a couple of weeks. So what they're proposing is that of the 28 Ukrainian housing, they'll provide 40% of the cost of the property, plus another £20,000 for extraneous costs and so on. For the Afghans, they're providing 50%. So we have to find the other 60 on 50% of the money. This is a good deal as far as we're concerned, because obviously in the long run, hopefully we will have no further need for refugee housing, and they will revert to our own housing stock. And so what this actually means is, with this subsidy, it means that we can buy houses that don't actually meet our viability formulas. So bigger and better houses, hopefully. On the second item, which is the maintenance and the double glazing and so on, I'd refer members to the housing strategy, which makes it clear that we have a huge ongoing investment plan, 2 streams to that. That's our planned maintenance, where we regularly replace obsolete kitchens, bathrooms, and that sort of thing. And then there's a second stream, which is retrofitting of housing to work towards our zero carbon aims. This is a 30-year program, and we're committing something in the order of £400 million in order to achieve this over that period. So plenty going on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, are there any other questions? No. Councillor Turbot, do you want to come back at all on behalf of scrutiny?
Yeah, just on one point, which I think was very well made, is there's a whole bunch of stuff that lies behind the action plan, or maybe over it, whatever, but is linked. So the reading of the action plan should be set in the context of those policy statements and that guidance. So I think it behoves us to be, as a committee, more thorough in checking all that stuff out. But it would be great if officers could actually give us some signposts to some of those policy documents. Now, it does suggest that the action plan might actually be a little more dynamic, in the sense there's an action, there's a policy background, maybe risks and context information. So it says maybe this just needs to be more than word tables. It needs to be somewhat more lively linked document that we could refer to. But that's perhaps for the future. But we do take that point that we should be looking at policy in a little more detail, but we would be grateful for the help to access the right stuff. Yeah.
Thanks. So I think that's a really helpful suggestion, and we will do that. All right, so thank you to Scrutiny for that. Now, look, we've been going for about 2 hours. Does anybody want a quick 5-minute comfort break? Because we've got quite a lot of money stuff to get through, which I hope we get through. 5 minutes? 5 minutes. Reconvene at 11:55. rejoin us after a brief comfort break, and we're just going to resume by voting on the business plan. So the recommendations are set out in paragraph 5 on page 63. Do members agree with the proposal? Anyone wish to vote against the proposal? Anyone wish to abstain? The Cabinet therefore agrees the proposals by affirmation. Moving on swiftly to item 11, which is the capital strategy. And Councillor John Williams is going to present this, and I think Councillor Brian Milnes is going to second it. So over to you, Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Leader. This is purely to upgrade the capital strategy to include new guidance from the government, so I hope it's not controversial.
Thank you very much. Councillor Milnes?
And I'm happy to support that. Thank you, Leader.
Any questions from Cabinet? Any questions from anyone else? Thank you. Okay, so we're moving on to the...
No.
Sorry?
I thought you were moving on to the next one.
No. Panic not. We're going to move to the recommendation and the vote. Doesn't trust me. Okay, so the recommendation is at 3 on page 85. So do members agree with the proposal? Anyone wish to vote against? Anyone wish to abstain? Cabinet therefore agrees the proposals by affirmation. And item 12 is the Treasury Management Strategy, which is going to be presented by Councillor John Williams and seconded by Councillor Henry Batchelor. Lovely. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Leader. Just 2 points on this. First of all, you'll see from the amendments to it that we're not proposing to have any further short-term borrowing for this year. And the second thing is that you'll see that on the counterparties, we have included 4 new banks, but 3 of these banks are foreign banks, 2 are German and 1 is Canadian. And the reason for that is that because of the very poor financial performance of this country, actually foreign banks now represent a better place to invest our money than UK banks.
Thank you. Councillor Batchelor?
Nothing further, Chair.
No. Any questions from Cabinet? Any questions from anyone else? No. Okay, so the recommendation is set out at number 3 on page 107. Do members agree with the proposal? Anyone wish to vote against? Anyone wish to abstain? So Cabinet therefore agrees the proposal by affirmation. And item 13 is the review of earmarked reserves. Councillor John Williams will present this again, and I think Councillor Bill Handley is seconding this. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Leader. This is something we do every year. It's to ensure that we don't have reserves earmarked for projects that are no longer happening or have taken place. And this is purely to identify where we are now in using our reserves and where we've earmarked those reserves for particular things in the future.
Thank you very much. Councillor Handley?
I have nothing to add. Thank you, Leader.
Okay, any questions? Any questions from anyone else? No? This is going quickly, isn't it? Marvellous. Okay, so recommendations at 3 on a page 145. Do members agree with the proposals? Anyone wish to vote against the proposals? Anyone wish to abstain? Cabinet therefore agrees the proposals by affirmation. And item 14 is the summary general fund revenue budget. And I think scrutiny and overview had a look at this. So Councillor John Williams will present it. It's being seconded by, it was to be Peter MacDonald, but I will do that if Councillor Peter MacDonald's been called out to a work call. So I will second it. And then I'll come to Councillor Stobart for the feedback from scrutiny and overview. So Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Leader. Can I refer people to the supplement to the agenda, which has the most up-to-date figures and takes into account the decision on business rates, which obviously has an impact on our financial situation. You'll see that from Appendix A that we need to find 32.7 million from taxations and grants to offset our expenditure. And we receive, and if you look on the table in paragraph 23, you'll see that our core spending power, which is the grants and council tax we receive, make up about half of that. So we rely on our investment income and business rates principally to make up the rest. You'll see that we've made a decision to recommend to full council that we increase council tax by just over 3%, 3.1%, which is 10p a week for a Band D property, in order to help us make up that difference. And this is against the background where we have the consumer price index at around 10 to 11%, and we have wage inflation averaging around 6%. So a 3% increase is actually a reduction in real terms. I appreciate that people are in economic hardship because of the state of the finances of the country, but we have to ensure that we provide core services to our residents, and we are not immune from inflation, unfortunately. So that inflation is affecting us just as it's affecting families up and down the country. And therefore, you know, we have decided to continue with our medium-term financial strategy, which was to, and still is, to increase council tax by £5 a year. And so we will be doing that next year. Incidentally, even doing that, you'll recall that when the mid-term financial strategy came to Cabinet before Christmas, we were looking at a deficit at the end of that 5-year period of just over £6 million. So, you know, we are not in the situation where we can not put up council tax because we still have that medium-term deficit to close. But I hope people understand that a 10p a week increase for an average property, average council taxpayer, is very good value for money given the services that we provide and given the fact that we are increasing council tax by 3% while inflation is now running at between 10 and 11%. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Williams. I'll come to Councillor Stobart now to... yes, I will second it, but I'll come to Councillor Stobart first, and then I'll second and speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. So our scrutiny of the draft budget did actually last quite a long time, but you'll see that the number of points we raised is relatively small, is 6 or so, but let me give you a flavour for what we talked about. When Scrutiny Overview looks at stuff, we are sometimes investigating the minutiae of the processes that lie behind. And it gives us a chance to kind of investigate without necessarily questioning the result. So one of the first things we looked at was Section 106 process. The Scrutiny Overview has a bit of a thing about Section 106 at the moment, and so we dug a little into that, but we got a really helpful answer from the Joint Director of Planning, And we were asking why Section 106 budgets were falling, but in fact the comment from Stephen Kelly was around the risk share with developers and how funds actually appeared in budgets. So I think that was one of those opportunities where we could dig and we could find out a little bit more about the processes. So I didn't want to sort of query that, except use it as an illustration of where Scrutiny Overview can dig and discover. And it gives us a better basis, I think, for our continuing scrutiny in different contexts. Then just proceeding through some of the items we talked about, we were interested in a greater encouragement, or certainly to be satisfied that self-build was being appropriately encouraged in new developments across the Greater Cambridge area. We'd value clarity, and we may be coming back to the point that, Leader, you raised about the background to things. So recharging sometimes appears in the budgets in a, to members of the Scrutiny and Overview Committee in a confusing way. So perhaps a little more context and pointers on the part of officers in the way the documents are presented would be a help. It doesn't relieve us of the work of digging and understanding, but some additional context might help. We were concerned about new things appearing in the budget. I personally raised the matter of voter ID and its implications, and Chief Executive confirmed that this would be cost neutral to the council, but we would like to keep an eye on this because it will absorb management time, and we can't predict when that management time will be needed in relation to other things that the council is doing. And we're back to a question that, in fact, we're all seeing, I think almost without exception, members of the committee are seeing in their own areas, in their parishes, which is the street lighting confusion, where street lights are managed at different levels by different people. The costs of providing electricity to street lighting are very uncertain, and so we raise that as a concern that would need to be addressed. We did, during the course of the discussion, comment on arts and culture policy, and that we would very much like to see moves towards an arts and culture policy for the council. And we took the opportunity to review the Conservative Group budget proposal. So we had a bit of a Q&A on that in relation to freeze on council tax, including the wider implications for service delivery. And we spoke briefly about fraud. But the conclusion was, in each case, that we would note and support both the budget proposal and also the submission of the Conservative Group budget proposal to Cabinet today.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Stobart. So I'm happy to second this, and I'll respond to your points. Helpful comments about Section 106 income, and so that's good to note. On freezing council tax, so the outcome of freezing council tax will mean a reduction in services and resources, and probably human resources, in all honesty. So, and also it just means that you're then playing catch up, and you never do catch up. So we have discussed it, and what we're proposing here is we believe, based on good evidence, if we want to maintain service levels to our residents at a time of increasing need, increasing reliance on local authorities. In relation to self-build, so council land sales where self-build restrictions were in place resulted in lower sale prices, and this project's therefore ended. But the planning department does continue to maintain a database for self-build. But it was, as I say, well, we don't have any land, but where we have had land and we've sold it for self-build, actually we get less money for it, and actually not at a time when we can afford to get less money for small amounts of land that we have. We note what Scrutiny have said about clarity over recharges. It's really complicated. don't pretend I understand it, but so I would probably benefit from that as well. On arts and culture, so, you know, as things stand at the moment, we have neither the capacity in terms of man and woman hours and power, or the money to pursue an arts and culture strategy. It's a nice to have, and I certainly hope that before too long we're in a position to have that nice to have. When I joined this council, there was an arts officer here, and considerable sums of money were doled out by the council to support the arts. That was that prior to National Lottery? It might have been, actually. Obviously, there are other sources. Where there is money in Section 106 that's identified up for arts and culture, we shall make sure that that is retained for that and given out to, you know, parish councils or whichever bodies can actually deliver at the coalface for it. But as things stand at the moment, it's on the wish list for when we haven't got so many other burdens to deal with. On voter ID, massive pushback from the LGA on this, particularly for those councils who are meant to be implementing it this May. So, you know, we are very fortunate not to have elections this May because the pressure of implementing all these new regulations by then is going to be considerable, and in getting voter ID to all those people who don't have it, and that's down to the council. I think Plymouth think they're going to have to provide voter ID for 8,000 people, and I think they worked out if that takes 20 minutes per, for an officer to do, you know, there simply are not enough hours between now and May to get all that voter ID out. So, you know, it's another rushed knee-jerk reaction, but it's what we're lumbered with. And in relation to street lighting, well, actually, you know, we're supporting Gamlingay, my village, on this. So we provide signposting and assistance to parish councils on street lighting issues, you know, particularly where, you know, the costs are kind of out of control as they are for some. We help signpost them to possibly cheaper supplies, such as through ESPO. We help them challenge bills, particularly where there are unmetered supplies or lighting isn't in their own inventories, and we do that via the meter administrator. So as well as Gamlingay, the council is currently supporting Lulworth, Fen Drayton and Stoke-on-Quay. So if any of your parish councils are struggling, then just come and ask us, because we're already doing this. Okay, thank you very much indeed. So are there any questions? Councillor Williams.
Sorry, just to add to what you said about the policy, arts and culture policy, that doesn't mean that we don't give money to organisations. For example, from the community chest, we have given money to Cotton and Brass Band. We've given money to Falmere to put on a panto. We've given money to the Great Crizzle Windmill, and we've also given money to the Histon and Impington Archaeology Group, and also the Melbourne Amateur Dramatic Society. So, you know, we do give money to arts and culture from the community chest, and that's available grants of up to £2,000. But as you rightly say, we don't actually have a policy at this moment, and I'm sure we will do that as soon as we're able.
Thank you very much for that clarification. Yes, of course. So, okay. Any other questions? Councillor Stobart, do you want to come back?
Just very briefly, I didn't mention, it was an oversight, thanks to the officers for the support for both the action plan and the draft budget process, much appreciated. And for officers who stayed online for several hours, I have to say, I think this joint scrutiny lasted 3.5 hours. It was a bit of a marathon session. Just on the role of scrutiny to perhaps finish, we touched on it just a moment ago in relation to the action plan, but the possibility for scrutiny overview to, in a sense, suggest stuff, not just investigate and call things out, but to actually perhaps suggest new ideas, ways of doing things. I think it's something we haven't brought to in a sense, to the top of our agenda, but I think as a committee we should reflect on that to help innovate and suggest new ways of doing things. I think that's all I have to say. The arts and culture comment, I do note, and we'll be thinking about that, but we will continue to ask about arts and culture in the Greater Cambridge area.
Thank you very much. I'm good. Before I respond to you, I'll bring in Councillor Milnes.
Yeah, just to reflect Councillor Stobart's comment about having scrutiny and overview, taking an active role in policy development, which is really the function of a pre-scrutiny model. And that was certainly something that we were looking at doing. And we've got triangulation meetings set up, which will look exactly at that strategic and policy level development.
Thank you. So just to add to that, so this is we are unusual in running pre-scrutiny, and that's absolutely about feeding into policy development. I wonder whether the scrutiny committee would like some training specifically in how scrutiny and overview can influence policy development. I wonder if that would help. Actually, I think it might help Cabinet as well, for us to better understand how scrutiny can start to contribute more overtly into policy development through pre-scrutiny. Would that be something you'd like us to look into?
Yes, indeed. So I hesitate to speak on behalf of the committee because we haven't had that discussion, but we'll put it on our agenda, and I think the reaction will be a positive one.
That's lovely, and perhaps we could ask officers to investigate what might be available from, I suppose, the Office of Public Scrutiny. What sort of training might be available that we could access, so that you're talking about something substantive when you do debate it. Okay, that's lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, right. Gosh, in the meantime, the computer goes blank. Righty-ho. So we are at the recommendations, which are copious. Item 3 on page 157 and 158. So do members agree with proposals? Anyone wish to vote against? Anyone wish to abstain? Cabinet therefore agrees the proposals by affirmation. And item 15, sorry, this is a very long meeting, so but we're doing quite well now. Capital programme. So John Williams to propose and Councillor John Batchelor to second. John Williams. Have I jumped again? No. Capital programme. Am I right? Yeah. Right. Strong coffee for John, please. Right, John Williams.
Thank you, Leader. Given the lateness of this meeting, I'll just move this and take any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Batchelor?
Yeah, happy to second this. And we'll reserve comment should there be necessary.
Thank you. Any questions? No questions. We'll go straight to the recommendation on page 247. Recommend that the Cabinet consider the report and, if satisfied, to recommend to full council the revised General Fund Capital Programme outlined at Appendix A. So do members agree with the proposal? Anyone wish to vote against? Anyone wish to abstain? Cabinet therefore agrees the proposals by affirmation. Item 16, Housing Revenue Account, Revenue and Capital Budget 2023-24. It's Councillor John Williams again and Councillor John Batchelor again to second. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Leader. As you'll see, that one of the recommendations here is that we increase council house rents by 7%. We're having to do this in order to maintain our house building programme. We discussed earlier our council house building programme, which I think we all agree is fantastic at the moment. Building, our new target is 75 homes a year, and we've achieving over 80 homes a year recently. As has been mentioned by the lead member for housing, we have a right to buy sales still, and that is accounting for a loss of around 20 to 30 homes. But nevertheless, as a result, we are achieving a net growth of around 40 homes a year, which is really solely needed. I mean, we have I believe that we have a waiting list of over 2,000. So, you know, it's extremely important that we maintain that delivery, and we can only do that because of the way the council housing is ring-fenced, that we have to increase council rents to the maximum that we're being allowed to, which is 7%. Again, though, I must emphasise that taken in context, we are looking at inflation at 11%. So it's still less than inflation, so it is a real cut. But nevertheless, this is something that, you know, we don't really want to do, but we weighing up, you know, do we not put rents up by so much, or do we not build more council houses? I think, you know, we've taken the right decision that we should be building council houses.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Batchelor?
Yes, happy to second this, and perhaps just add a word on the rent question. Members should be aware that the rental income actually pays for virtually everything within the housing sector. So underlying the main cost we have is maintaining a loan of £205 million, which the government, in its wisdom, required us to pay in order to maintain our housing stock. That represents 25% of our income is actually used to support that payment. New builds is 50%, 15% of our income, and 46% of repairs and maintenance, actually keeping the stock in good order. As you will see, overall, we are actually planning on a deficit budget this year and next year, with only coming back into surplus in year 3. So we don't have the flexibility to actually go any lower than the 7% in order to maintain value of our stock and properties. So other than that, I'm very happy to second the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a really, really helpful explanation. Thank you. Councillor Milnes.
Yeah, I just wanted to reflect, and Councillor Batchelor will confirm that my understanding is right. When we first took over administration, we were actually forced to reduce council property rents, which obviously sent us backwards.
Yes, absolutely right. The government required us to reduce the rents by 1% over a 4-year period. This undermined the whole principle of payback. When we took out the loan, the objective was to pay it down over 30 years. The fact that so our rental level was set in order to achieve that. Losing 1% plus inflation for 4 years has knocked that out entirely, and now what we are doing is maintaining debt. We will have to pay back in about 15 to 20 years' time, but the plan then would simply be to refinance. So there is no plan at this stage to actually pay down the debt. So again, we've got to be in a position where we can protect ourselves, because you never know what's going to happen. If there's a sudden huge inflation, more inflation and so on, there are dangers in this, clearly.
Thank you, that's really helpful. Any more questions? No? Okay. And of course, inflation is particularly hitting construction and maintenance industries more than others. So, okay. So the recommendations are on page 257 and 258, number 3. There's lots of them, so I won't read them out. So do members agree with the proposal? Anyone wish to vote against? Anyone wish to abstain? Cabinet therefore agrees the proposals by affirmation. And the last item is local council tax support. So that's Councillor John Williams propose and Councillor Brian Mills seconding. Thank you, Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Leader. I hope this isn't contentious. Back last autumn, we were offered a number of options to, well, the localised council tax scheme was reviewed and we were offered a number of options on how to take this forward to ensure that those that needed to be benefited by this could. And we decided on one option to go out to consultation. As a result of that consultation, we are now recommending to you and to recommend to full council that we go ahead with the option which increases the support provided to residents, including those who are on low incomes and in work, so that we actually reach more people. And I hope that you agree with me that this is certainly a good thing that we should be doing at this moment in time with the cost of living crisis.
Thank you. Councillor Mills?
Yes, just to reinforce the timing of this is clearly very suitable for the cost of living crisis. So I'm very happy to support this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? No. Okay, so this is a recommendation to council, and option one is the preferred option. So let's get to the right bit. So the recommendation is on page 297. So do members agree with the proposal? Anyone wish to vote against? Anyone wish to abstain? Cabinet therefore agrees the proposals by affirmation. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Councillor Stobart, Councillor Williams, Councillor Ellington, and officers for, sorry, it was quite a long, unusually long meeting, but we had a lot to get through. We bring this meeting to close. Members of the public who are watching the website, this means the video stream will now end. Thank you very much for joining us to view today's Cabinet meeting. I note the next meeting of Cabinet is scheduled to take place on Monday, the 20th of March.